Good evening and welcome to Writers on Writing. This show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. I'm your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, Executive Director and founder of the Center for Black Literature and Director of the National Black Writers Conference. Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers talk about the African diaspora. And you could also view the taping by going to the Center for Black Literature YouTube page, which will be posted after this interview. So thank you for listening in. Thank you for viewing. And I'm very pleased and excited to have Jamiyla Chisholm, who's written The Community, which is a very courageous book. I have to commend you for having the courage to tell that story and to write it. And Jamiyla is a journalist. She's a writer. This is her book, a memoir. This is her first book, but she's written a number of articles and served on media campaigns and in publications. She's written for Essence, Color Lines, Time's Up, Vibe, and The Source. She's an avid traveler, runner, and language learner. So thank you again for having the courage to tell his story, The Community. And I think the community just is symptomatic of what we should be at this time in our nation. When you look at what's going on, it can help us personally, it can help us in our classrooms, it can help us with our family, it can help the world if we begin to think about things as a community. But as I said, this was a very courageous story because you told, some people might say it's a secret. So why don't you just give our listeners just a brief synopsis of what this book is about and why you decided to tell this story.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greene. I first want to thank you and the Center for Black Literature and Medgar Evers for inviting me into this dialogue. I feel really honored to be in conversation with you. Black History Month, the time when lots of Black thought is under attack currently. I feel very special to be given this platform to speak. Um, and thank you for that beautiful, beautiful opening and welcome and introduction. You're absolutely right. I am a journalist, and I've been a journalist for more than 20 years. It was the um, profession that I fell into as a way to have a voice, basically. And I really love research. I'm a big research
Mhm.
junkie. So journalism kind of married the ability to tell stories as well as do historical research and just dig through crates, so to speak. And the impetus for The Community, my memoir, which you said, so it's based on a true story, as our memoirs are. And I like to think that it is sort of a two-part or maybe a three-tiered story that I'm telling. One is a love story between my mother and myself.
Yes.
Another I look at as a love story between myself and the Black community writ large. And third, it is me trying to excavate and explain how it is that some vulnerable sectors of our population can fall prey to demagogues or cults. And I think it's not um, uh, common for a lot of people in the Black community to even consider cults or to think of themselves as possibly being prey to one, because we have a very uh, historied um, uh, experience of collective movement. We do things as a community, hence the title. But there are traps sometimes, especially during um, prescient historical moments when voices that may not be um, uh, here for our benefit, for the collective benefit, can wriggle in and find some kind of vulnerability to poke through. But more importantly, I like to think of the community as me really telling the story of my parents and how that lends itself to the larger narrative of the Black collective.
Right. And it's interesting, you started with your parent, and I had an opportunity to meet your mom. And so I just kept thinking and imagining as I was reading it, what it must have been like to experience that. And you had an interesting style because you're going back and forth. It's recursive. It's not a linear memoir. But and you really deal with some topics, in addition to looking at the community, you're dealing with abuse and trauma and marginalization. You're dealing with the need to have spirituality in our lives, and along with the need for community. So it's really complicated. And I definitely sense throughout the memoir that you are conflicted. You were conflicted about a number of situations. You were conflicted about being in that situation. You were conflicted when you saw what was happening in the community, how Black men and women viewed themselves. And you were conflicted about the safe space, but yet feeling marginalized from other communities. So I just want you to reflect on how this memoir really illustrates how we survive trauma.
Yes, Dr. Greene, you're absolutely right. There was a lot of push and pull uh, that was going on within me in the storytelling. Um, I think the whole point of a memoir is to be as honest as one can possibly be, even when it's challenging. And I found working through this process that the harder it was for me to confront something, that's where I really needed to lean in more, right? The challenge is where we get to stretch. So looking at, uh, you know, what do I tell? How do I tell it? Why am I telling these things? Um, Part of it for me, or rather, a large part of it for me was I wanted to remind people of this innocence of childhood and how precious it is, and how we might think that children may not be affected by certain things, whether that is generational trauma that is passed down to us
Mhm.
from our paternal people, or it's the collective trauma that we feel as a group that is historically just vibrating through our bones. Whatever that is, children feel it as innately and as severely as adults do. And the real reason that pushed me to write this book was the child eventually becomes an adult.
Yes.
And, those feelings, those stories, those vibrations, so to speak, they don't necessarily leave. And that's part of why, to your point, that my memoir wasn't written linearly, is I don't think memory works that way. I think memory shows up in pieces and puzzles, and it's our job to try to make an art piece of it, or to sew these disparate threads together. And that's how I really thought about the history, actually, of Black people in this country. Is there are all these little threads that, by the time we get to my generation or the generation after me, hopefully we're still putting these threads together, but a lot of things can be lost, especially within our collective history. But I think it's our job to make sure that we don't lose the through line to the story, to what the truths are. And, I really am hoping that that is something uh, that is a mirror with what I did in my memoir. No, it's not linear, but, trauma isn't linear, recovering from trauma isn't linear, even recognizing when something traumatic has happened to you isn't linear. Trauma is one of those things I really feel after having worked on this memoir and going down the rabbit hole of neurology to figure out, well, how does memory really work? How does memory show up? Um, it's not that something violent or irrational happens to us on Monday and we're able to reconcile it by Friday.
Right. But
It does.
what you demonstrate in this book is what you go through, but you also demonstrated the power of resilience, which
Mm,
they say children particularly, always have. And so through the power of resilience, you were able to go back and to tell this story. And also, trauma, I think, impacts the way we move forward and we heal. We have one of our panels is the power of literature as healing. Do you want to
that's right.
reflect on that? How is literature representative of healing?
I don't think for me personally, there is any form that is more healing than literature is. Not even running, and I love running. I love dancing. I love singing off key. However, um, the moment that I was able to have my first book in my hand, I don't even think I was, even old enough to know how to read legibly, but just seeing a story, just a story that someone created and it was about some kid, that to me said agency. And finally, of course, when I was able to put language together on page and to read, books became my escape mechanism. And it is the world that I've lived in forever. It is the way that I'm able to express myself, is through language. The way I'm able to interpret and understand other people is through language and through their own stories. And this is, I think, how humans connect on the most basic level is through our storytelling. So for me, literature is and has been one of the most healing things I've ever had. Reading I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, as well as um, For Color Girls Who Committed Suicide When the Rainbow Wasn't Enough by Ntozake Shange. I mean, I remember my brain exploding. I really was not sophisticated enough to understand when I was reading this for the first time, either of these women's books, what I was reading, but there was something metabolic that I could feel that spoke to me. And it said to me, oh, Jamila, you may not have experienced these specific traumas, but these women are speaking your song and you're not alone. And that is what literature does to me is it just breaks all the silos open and
Right.
says, there's a home here for you.
So it feeds that, Emma, I love the way you said that. So it feeds that inner spirit. It helps us spiritually, but it also feeds the need to have spirituality in your life, to understand that there are other forces that maybe you
Right.
can get stirred through literature that helps you to connect to the fact that there's something that's broader than you if you go outside of this. And I want to turn that over to just looking at the broader story of this book, which is about a religious community
Mm,
and a community that was very much based on the importance of pride and self-determination and having self-discipline and understanding one's history and knowledge. You want to reflect on that, how this community, in a larger sense, represented spirituality or religion, and also the importance of Black pride and self-determination.
absolutely. The Ansaro Allah community, which was the official name, of our collective, the community for short, that's what we called it belovedly, uh, was first and foremost a place where people came together to pray. You know, we practice a form of Islam that was mixed with a lot of Black nationalist teachings, which was perfect and ripe for the time in which the community was founded, which was in the 70s. There was a nice window of opportunity there. Black people were, from what I understand, having interviewed my mother and speaking with other people from that period of time, that we had lost so many of our beloveds. So many of our leaders had been assassinated and massacred, and we'd watched our student organizations dismantled. So all these nonviolent activities that we were really, really trying, um, the community just kind of turned it on its head and said, we're a bit done with this, we want self-determination. We do not want to have a handout from anyone. And as a result, we became a very enclosed
Yes.
community. So there were not outsiders who came in unless they came in to join. We didn't have onlookers, so to speak. We quote unquote did not receive a handout from the man. Although there is irony in the
Yes.
economics,
Yes.
that was involved in the community. But the teachings that we were beautiful, powerful, historical, uh, self-determined, and Black were very, very powerful things to hear when the world is saying, go sit down and say nothing.
Yes.
This was a place where we could look around and everyone was us. And that was a very, very beautiful and powerful thing to experience, especially as a child. For that to be one's foundation, that we are all in this together. And, um, whatever happens to one happens to all of us. There is so much power in
Yes.
that. And, sometimes I get a little tingly now, even years later, even after I wrote the book and examined, the horrors behind the veil of this place. It really taught me very early on to love my people and to love myself. And I'm forever grateful for that lesson.
Right. So just going back, it's a nice segue into the next question about how this experience affected your personal life and your writing life.
A little activist, I think, was born inside of me before I even knew what
A
the
little
word activist
activist.
was. I did not know that journalism could be a form of activism or just writing, storytelling. Um, but I knew that uh, in my need, my really strong urge to always get information and to be able to parse through it and digest it, uh, that need was often met with resistance from my part because I could see where things were untrue, where there were false histories being spun or false realities. And again, that went back to the little girl who was in the community who was questioning everything around her all the time. So it felt like a really natural progression for me to become a journalist. Um, the kind of journalism that was really the thing that motivated me, which was writing about culture, specifically people of color. I think maybe part of that just has to do with my own DNA, but I really think it stems from, my parents and coming from the community that there is no better story to tell than ours. There's no better unjust to discover than ours. And this is no slight to any other marginalized group, but I've always been taught that what happens to Black folks, it's coming for everybody else at some point.
Yes.
So, there's a precedent that either, we flourish and everyone else gets to eat alongside of us, or we're marginalized and we're disenfranchised, and it's not long before it happens to another marginalized group or even a group who maybe wasn't so marginalized, but the tide could be turned easily. And journalism, I think, is really underrated and undervalued. And I don't know if everyone knows how to do it well, but when it's done really well, when we can get untold stories told, and we can make a reader or an audience say, oh my goodness, I had no idea, or I never thought about it that way. There's so much joy in that for me, of just being able to be a bit of an educator, so to
Yes.
speak.
A journalist is also an historian, right?
That's right.
Because, right. So, what have been some highlights around your journalism career? Some stories that you've taken that have really inspired you, touched you, or even maybe have been challenging for you?
One of those stories, which is interesting, Dr. Greene, I almost wish I could revisit it at certain points. This was very early on in my career. I had gone to Ghana, and I, quote unquote, discovered skin bleaching. I had very little knowledge. I knew what skin bleaching was, from uh, reading about, the 1920s and
Right.
in the United States and all of that, and people who would try to pass or whatever. But it really shocked me that uh, Ghana, one of the first independent African countries, as well as one of the most staunchly Black nationalistic countries on the continent, had a subculture of skin bleaching. And the further I dug, I mean, that was the first thing that kind of blew my mind. But the further I dug was understanding that a lot of the people in Ghana who do skin bleach, a lot of them are sex workers, and trying to understand then the colonization that brought them to thinking that by whiteness proximity, that there's some kind of economic advantage there. That, I mean, just even saying that is a mouthful and a
Yes.
lot to try to, understand. But that was a story that I fell upon that kind of changed me inside. I stayed with these sex workers for a month, reporting on the story. I lived with them, I hung out with them. I got to see how they lived, and just really got to see them as humans, and not a story, not a subject for a story or
Mhm.
ends to means to a story. And I will say that when I left the country, I was almost in tears about it because I didn't want to leave any of these people. They had kind of become a little bit of family to me. And the thing that really broke my heart was that it was just by chance they were born in Accra and I was born in Brooklyn.
Yes. Yeah. I
Just
think
happened
you're, yeah, you
chance.
realize that when my only trip to the continent, that's what I felt about. They were born here and I was born here. They were born in Accra. So one of the things that I always know writers are motivated by other writers, and they are often in conversation with other writers. You named a couple of people who've inspired you, Maya Angelou and Tasaki Shange. Who are the writers that you're in conversation with? Or, and they can be journalists, scholars, whatever. Who are the people who you are in conversation with or who you turn to as you go through this thought process of creating content and doing research and writing?
I will say that I have several literary gods and goddesses, uh, but I find myself turning more to Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, especially during times of stress and distress. I feel like they just really understand the whole arc of history.
Yes.
I don't know how they did it, but I think like right now I have by my bedside Toni Morrison's essays of self
Heights of memory.
uh uh no, I think it's
I
essays on self-regard.
self-regard. Yeah, I do
Yes,
too. I keep
yes.
she has so much, it's so rich.
It's I mean, it's, you know, I read pieces of it before I go to bed because I want to meditate on it through my sleep, you know. Um, outside of, you know, these two people who I just really revere, I have a community of writers. We call ourselves the Writing Tribe. And there are 6 of us total. 5 of us met in our MFA program. And we are all from different walks of life. You know, we're in different stages of our lives, but the one thing that is constant is that we're storytellers. And we are drudging sometimes, mud walking through the process of trying to get thought on paper or on screen or whatever our mechanism is. Um, and when this is again, you know, the when I think about community is I really need this community because writing is a very lonely job.
Yes.
Um, and I mean, it's rewarding. I love it. I really don't want to do anything else, but it's lonely. And being in one's head all the time is not fun. So being able to, you know, call up my tribe or shoot them a text or, you know, send an essay that I read that just really kind of turned me on, or a speech that I've watched, you know, where someone has turned a light bulb off in my head. Um, that is the thing that really keeps bringing me back to the page, especially when it's hard to be able to turn to them and say, you know, I'm stuck on this idea and I have no idea what I'm saying. I know I'm trying to say something, but I don't know what it is. And then we can spitball off each other and really just kind of handhold each other through something that can just feel like wading in water by yourself.
Right. I love
It's like
your
having a team.
metaphors. I really relate to that and understand that as how do you balance that writing life? And he said and then if you're doing other things, you're writing and you're reading and you're teaching and all of that. So as we just come to a close, what message do you have for emerging writers and for those who are thinking about writing a memoir?
Ah, you know, if anyone who's thinking about writing a memoir, I'd say that's a brave thought. Um, very brave. It's hard if it's done correctly. You know, be honest and be kind to oneself. Definitely be kind. I think memoirists must remember that there is this is hard work, this excavation, you know, playing self-anthropologist, running through one's life or a moment that has really changed us and how that has affected us forever. That is a hard thing to look at. And there might be times when we don't remember something and it comes to us later. But that's okay, you know, as long as we're honest about what we know, what we don't know, and how we got there. And for any emerging writers, regardless of what they're working on, my advice is to keep writing always. And everyone says that, but I also want to say keep reading also. I think a lot of people, um, you know, with our beautiful technology, probably read in spurts or maybe not at all, you know, but the art of reading is quintessential to the art of writing. This is how we continue to learn even when we're not in school, is to just keep reading
Oh,
and keep the pen moving.
thank you for sharing that. And I want to encourage our listening audience to purchase The Community by Jamiyla Chisholm. It's a really wonderful book. And you know, my tagline for this show is the writer is always reading. The reader is always writing. Keep reading and empower yourselves as readers and writers. As long as you do that, the thoughts will keep coming. and you'll be a stronger writer. Thank you so much for sharing your gems with us and sharing part of your story. And I wish you well. I didn't have a chance to ask you about your next project, but if you want to just say that, and if you have something you want to share as we close.
Thank you, Dr. Greene, so much. This has been wonderful. Currently, I'm working on a novel, taking a break from, navel gazing, and I am almost through it. So, it's kind of hard to say anything else about that, but I say it to everybody, wish me luck and consistency to show up for these characters.
And thank you again. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Please write us at info@centerforblackLiterature.org. And you've been listening to Writers on Writing with your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and her interview with Jamiyla Chisholm. Take care.